certainly the conversation is steering towards, is this the future, or should we change? Should we become more militarily allied? What do you think about this conversation? Is it good to have it, or are you worried now about, given, I suppose, our aid and helping towards military aid in Ukraine, where this is all going?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about it. I think in Ireland and right across Europe, a certain shock doctrine is taking place to use the righteous horror of people against the brutal invasion by Putin of Ukraine to try to drive a process of militarisation of the EU and undermining of neutrality. So if you look, for example, at the European Parliament resolution that was passed a couple of days ago and was widely referred to as, it's a resolution condemning the invasion of Ukraine. It wasn't just doing that. It was calling for increased military spending in every European state. It was calling for increased integration with NATO. It was calling for investment in fossil fuel, LNG infrastructure. Then we have this by Leo Varadkar today. We had a media interview from him on Tuesday, basically saying we're going to do away with Ireland's policy of neutrality.
Is that what he was basically saying? Is that what he was saying? You're shaking your head there, Feargal.
I think that's what he was launching an assault on. And that's a long-standing attempt by lots of people in Fine Gael, and now they see the chance to go for it.
Well, he was talking about increasing defence spending to, €3 billion. He said, Alison, that he doesn't agree with that. It's too much. We have other priorities and demands, which a lot of people would agree with when they look at the other problems that this country has. But he does think that we need to increase spending. We need to pay military personnel more. We need to be able to monitor our own seas. We need better equipment. We need radar over our airspace. Would you agree with that?
I think that it's interesting to hear the language Paul uses in terms of shock doctrine. Normally when people speak about a shock doc, you're talking about something almost manufactured or that has been multiplied or exaggerated.
It means using a real thing to pursue an agenda that you already have.
Yeah,
that's what the Naomi Klein shock doctrine is about.
If that wasn't a shock, I don't know what was. What's happened, in the last while, and I think. Our neutrality has served us quite well, I think, up to this point. But the events of the last 9 to 10 days, I think, have shown that we are more than overdue a discussion on it. And I think it's interesting that while Leo Varadkar has been out in front and centre, I haven't heard the Taoiseach disagreeing too much with what he said. The Taoiseach spoke about this yesterday. Yeah. And I think that Irish people, you might say, would say, well, we're still neutral. But you could argue that we haven't been at all. We're certainly not politically neutral over the last couple of days. We've been out there front and centre, which I'm very glad to say we have been. We are militarily neutral. But what people do, I don't think we even have had a mature enough conversation for us all to understand what really does that mean.
And I think that's the question about what neutrality means
it's not
in the world
clear.
right now.
I don't think it's a conversation that we could have right now, but I think we would all acknowledge all has changed. All has changed. And I think we even saw, whenever it was now, was it 6 weeks ago, when the Russians were threatening to do those maritime manoeuvres with their navy. How utterly exposed we were. We wouldn't even have been able to monitor what they were doing. I'll finish on this point. You're mentioning the $3 billion. That's the top option of this recent commission that looked at our defence forces. There are other lesser expensive options. But the bottom line is that over the last 10 years particularly, those in power in government have run down our defence forces to they haven't an arse in their trousers now. So that's the joke of it all, given what has just happened.
Barry, clearly, the spending on our defence forces leaves an awful lot to be desired. That we're at this point that when we have an issue out at our seas, we have fishermen going out to suss out what's going on and taking it up with the Russian ambassador. And we need the RAF to help to manage our airspace. What's going on there? And don't we need to invest?
The programme for government made a commitment to do an investigation, to compile a report, to make recommendations to government. That has been done. The job and duty of government now is to respond to that. And I expect and hope that they will, insofar as they can. As the Taoiseach said, there's $3 billion sought, there's priorities to be decided upon in relation to other commitments, but that there has to be a massive injection into the well-being of our defence forces.
Do you think we should remain neutral?
In relation to neutrality, I think the immediacy of our response is what's vital at this stage. There's provision within the EU system to allow a country defend itself against aggression, which is illegal, which is barbaric, and any country worth its salt, such as ours, should be behind that and be thankful that there is a provision by which we can make a contribution. That contribution is going, specifically it said, towards non-lethal weapons, irrespective of what it's going to. There's 500 million being made available to allow those people in that army, in that country, respond effectively to the Russian onslaught.
Would you like it not to be non-lethal weapons and not to be putting fuel in the tanks, but more paying for the tanks?
I'm glad that the European community, the European Union, the European model, the free democratic societies that is contained within it, has the wherewithal to agree a programme that can respond effectively and work together with the UK and the US and other allies to ensure then that the issues of sanctions, as Fergus has said, has the potential to hit Russia hard where it hurts, and that's in their pockets. That might allow the Russian people to turn against this.
Yeah, and I guess the whole steer of the conversation that's also been brought up in recent days is about NATO and Ireland, and the question being asked that no one would have thought of, should Ireland join NATO?
Well, what Barry's referring to earlier is the mutual assistance clause. And just to talk about neutrality for a brief second, if I could, because it relates directly to NATO. Our neutrality has always been nuanced. It is not a binary issue. And the expression of nuance, for example, is that fuel that you describe, and that constructive abstention that we engaged in when we were making that contribution towards that 9 million, that EU fund. And as Barry says, isn't it fantastic that we're in a position to make that contribution? I just need to think we need to tap the brakes a little bit in the conversation around neutrality. We need to solve the problem that's in front of us. We need to solve the problem that's in front of us. And I was giving this a lot of thought over the last 48 hours. We need to have a really slow, considered conversation around neutrality and not have it in the context, just in the context of a fraught environment. And why not use the Citizens' Assembly to start that conversation? It solved a lot of social problems for us in relation to marriage equality, in relation to the repeal of the 8th. A slow, considered conversation around that. But make no mistake, Claire, if we don't solve the problem that's in front of us, doing exactly what we can, with what we have, where we are, Zelensky was on the news this evening and he started talking about Estonia, Lithuania. Just in relation to NATO, Ireland has already served under NATO missions.
In peacekeeping, in a peacekeeping capacity.
Exactly, with the UN
mandate.
There's threat to cyberspace as well, and the impact that can have. We need to pool our resources with whoever we can
in targeting
to protect
something like, because we're hearing more and more about the cyber warfare threat, Paul, and how we counter that if we don't have those defence alliances, if we don't, spend more money essentially on our defences. Would you agree that more money needs to be spent even to target something such as the HSE cyber hack that we saw?
Well, the HSE cyber attack was, when we discussed that at the time, it was an issue about the HSE and not investing in cybersecurity as the HSE. So I think there's a public sector issue there.
But to do that, there's a defence spend that's
somebody has the capacity to attack it in the way in which they did, which needs to be responded to.
I think in terms of defence spending, what we need to spend money on is having our defence personnel not living in poverty, which is the current conditions. But the middle option, which is the option that they're kind of likely to go for, the report says, well, we could keep it as it is, but that's terrible. We could go to 3 billion, which we'd really like to do, but we know that's not politically doable. The middle option is 500 million. That's 500 million euros a year. That's a choice. If you do that, if you invest in your fighter jets and your naval ships and all the rest, and to do the pay is about 50 million, right? But your 500, that's 2,000 homes you choose not to build. And I think it is better as a society we say, no, we won't give our money to the dealers of death and destruction, presumably the US armaments companies who would get these contracts. We're not going to give the money to them. Who do you think is delighted about Germany doubling their defence expenditure? It's these big corporations.